everyone that happens to be tuning in at the moment. I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J. Sitting to my immediate left is Talmadge Rodger Varnado the third.
How come you never say the Talmadge Rodger Varnado? If you're the Jared J, I mean, come on.
That's a valid question because of all the Talmadge Rodger Varnado the thirds that I've met, you are the Talmadge Rodger Varnado the third.
It only makes sense.
It really does. I think it's because I always call you the third, and so that's where the
so
the
two D's
is.
would be too confusing.
But it's really not because I think it's valid. I'm gonna have to start trying to work that in.
Crackers.
Yeah, taking some saltines and handing them to a pigeon that's hungry. So, in addition to talking about saltines and pigeons today, we're going to talk about what was the first movie that we remember seeing in theaters. And when I presented this idea to Talmadge, I said, you might remember, or excuse me, your mom or dad might tell you, no, we took you to see, fill in the blank when you're 3 years old. If you don't remember that, let's not worry too much about that. What's the first one you remember seeing, your experience?
My parents don't talk to me, so that would never happen. I'm not sure, so I had to go about this slightly differently. I do remember it was probably a drive-in.
Okay.
Probably. It was early 70s. So I got a list of about 8 or 9 movies that it could have been.
So then, everybody get comfortable. We're going to be talking about at least 10 movies here.
Well, we won't talk about them all, but then once I looked them up, I had to go back and look at what year they released to try to narrow it down.
Maybe the month of release date, if they were the same year.
But all of these, I think, maybe 1 or 2 aren't, but all these were Disney movies. So see if you remember some of these. Because some of them are well known and some of them
not so much.
But Escape from Witch Mountain.
I've heard of it. I don't think I ever saw it.
I doubt that was it, though, because it came out in 1975. And I would have gone to the theater before I was 4 or 5 years old. The Aristocats.
I know of it.
That came out in 70, so that's possible. Now, I was born in 70, so I would have to seen it after it'd been out a few years. So probably not that one, but it could be. The Rescuers, another animated film.
I think I saw that once.
That one came out in 77, so again, not likely, because I've been to the movies before that point. The Apple Dumplings Gang, 1970.
Is that one of the ones that Don Knotts is in?
It was Don Knotts.
Okay, as I say, that's familiar for some reason.
So that's 1975, so it's possible.
That's a contender.
It's possible. The Shaggy DA, that came out in 1976. So
I don't think I know that one.
You don't? That surprises me.
The Shaggy DA?
Yeah, it's a dog that was a
district attorney.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Okay.
And then these are classic Disney films, so obviously were possible, but it wouldn't have been in their first run because they're way before my time. But Snow White, because that's 1937. Lady and the Tramp, which was 1955. It could have been one. I'm leaning towards.
Those reran multiple times.
Yeah,
so.
I'm thinking if I had to guess, it's probably Lady and the Tramp, but I still don't know. And then I had Herbie the Love Bug. That was 1968, so not likely unless I saw it.
Unless they reran it just a few years later.
But possible. Benji in 1974 was definitely possible. And then Bambi, just like the other classics, 1942. The more I'm pushing, if I had to pick, I'd probably say either Bambi or Lady and the Tramp.
Okay.
But all of these are contenders, and it was definitely a drive-in, and it was definitely in the 70s.
Okay. So what do you remember? Do you have any vivid memories, even if you can't remember exactly which one of those movies, like your first time going to?
My first memory of Bambi, so I'm going to lean towards that, because I do remember being a kid having actual thoughts about the movie instead of just blindly watching it. And I just remember how sad I was. Same thing with Dumbo. So all those, it's like, even though they were cartoons, if an animal died or something like that, I do remember feeling sadness, and I even remember thinking at 3 or 4 years old, why would my mom bring me to this?
Am I being punished? Is this like a veiled punishment somehow?
Totally forgetting it's a cartoon and kids are supposed to like it,
right? Because
something died. As a kid, you don't really comprehend that, and it's like, why am I watching Bambi die? Well, not Bambi, but I think the parent or whatever.
And Bambi's not my choice. When we get to mine, I'll talk about. But Bambi's one of the first ones I remember seeing in theaters. Obviously on a re-release, but I remember the same thing. That scene where Bambi runs into the forest or the clearing or whatever, gets away from the hunters. turns around, starts saying, "Mom."
Yeah.
I remember that, and I had the same feeling. I remember being like, "What are we doing right now? Like, why am I watching this?"
So for that reason, I'll say my first was Bambi. I'm not swearing by it.
But that's the first memory you feel like,
okay.
I mean, that qualifies because that's kind of the thing is, what's the first one you remember seeing?
And then the other one would probably be Dumbo, because I remember, why are they making fun of him? I do remember thinking that. Probably because I have a limp and freckles and crooked teeth and I'm ugly. And so I'm like, I identify with people that get picked on. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But yeah, so it's one of those two. But I did like giving that walk down memory lane of all those Disney classics.
Yeah, and some of those I've not seen, and some of them.
But I know you're looking up the Shaggy DA as soon as it's
I'm gonna have to figure that one out. So when I was researching this, because when I presented it to you, I couldn't remember my answer. I had to go back and look at release dates because I knew it might have been Bambi. Turns out there was one that predates Bambi that I saw in theaters, and then one of the other ones I thought of was The Fox and the Hound.
Okay.
That was one of my favorite movies as a kid.
Okay. I remember that movie. I don't think I ever saw it, but I do remember.
Okay. I was a big fan of it at the time, and I haven't seen it maybe since I was
so
about 5.
So you're not a fan anymore?
I would still appreciate
I'm just asking.
it today.
Don't hit me. I'm just asking.
I don't know the answer. I'd have to rewatch it. I remember it. I think it was in kindergarten. I had a Fox and the Hound lunchbox that I took to school because I'd seen the movie.
That's a whole nother discussion.
That's a whole other episode.
So next time we meet, we're talking about
favorite lunchboxes as children. I mean,
kids don't have them anymore.
No,
they're missing out on something great.
People now be like, "What are they talking about?"
No lunchboxes and no Saturday morning cartoon.
No,
it's like, what do these kids do?
I don't know. Like, I wouldn't have known what to do without a metal box-shaped contraption with a handle on it that I could take my food to.
With some thermos with some Kool-Aid or something.
Yeah, it didn't matter what you had in there. It's just you have a thermos that matches the lunchbox.
Exactly.
That's all that mattered. It could have been empty for all we really cared. So yeah, maybe that's a topic for next time, Talmadge. But the first movie I remember seeing in theaters, and I don't know how well y'all can see my shirt, but I've worn a shirt that's a hint. 1980s, The Empire Strikes Back.
Really? Okay.
The first one. I was about 4 years old.
Okay.
And
that came out in what, 81?
1980.
80, okay.
And I saw the first Star Wars on television.
Okay.
Because back then, my parents weren't like big sci-fi fans.
Right.
But back then, we only got 3 TV stations. So if one of them had a movie on a Friday night, that's what we did.
Why are you shortchanging PBS?
So we had 4 stations back then, and if one of them had a movie on...
I mean, Sesame Street matters.
You know what? I don't know why I did that. Electric Company, no offense to Morgan Freeman, I couldn't believe I insulted y'all like that. So yeah, we had 4 stations, and if one of them one night had the first Star Wars movie playing, so we watched it. And at that time, I had not heard of the Star Wars universe. I didn't know what in the heck it was. And I remember as a young child watching that one on TV and just being enamored with this universe. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because now I really only primarily like movies that are grounded in reality. I don't like stuff that's really fake. But as a young child, this was so unlike anything I'd ever seen. I just remember seeing Chewbacca and thinking he was so cool, and seeing all this space travel and all these things I'd never thought about.
I was more of an R2D2 guy myself, but
I liked him too. R2D2 and the Jawas and all. I was just like, what? A part of me, I don't know if I thought on this level at that age, although I might have, but part of me is like, how did somebody sit around and think of this? Like, this is just an amazing imagination.
It's totally foreign,
that came up with this. And so I remember after watching that on TV, of course, they're advertising every commercial break that the new one's about to come out in theaters. Mm-hmm. I pleaded with my parents to go see it. And they were like, oh, yeah, okay. Because I had never been to the movie theaters. I had never asked to go. I didn't care about that. That was foreign to me. But for the first time, I felt like, no, there's something I really want to go see. And so before I talk about my experience of actually seeing that The Empire Strikes Back, I'll just touch a little bit on the impact that Star Wars A New Hope actually had on the industry. And as a child, I didn't know or care about all this, but it influenced so much of the business. First of all, and I'm going to jump down a little bit in my notes here, but it was... So the first Star Wars was an Academy Award nominee for Best Picture. Alec Guinness was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role for playing Obi-Wan Kenobi. George Lucas was nominated for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. Again, as a 4-year-old, I didn't know what any of that meant.
Right.
But just looking back on it now, it was massively successful. The Buck Rogers television film was released in 1979 and is said to have been inspired by the success of Star Wars.
It was. I remember.
There's a guy named Dino De Laurentiis who was a producer, and he had an interest in making a Flash Gordon film ever since the 1960s, but no one gave him the offer. And then, after the success of Star Wars, George Lucas turned down an offer to direct Flash Gordon, and Dino De Laurentiis then got a hold of that and got somebody else to direct it. But that opened the door for...
I remember that because I saw that in the theater too. Not a very good film, but no,
yeah.
It's all because of Star Wars.
It really was.
Battlestar Galactica, same thing.
Battlestar Galactica. Also, the original Star Trek series ran from 1966 to 1969 and was canceled. Gene Roddenberry wanted to make a feature film. All the studios said, why would we do that? The show was canceled after 3 years due to low ratings. After the massive success of Star Wars, guess what? Suddenly everybody wanted to make a Star Trek film, and so the first Star Trek film was released in 1979. Also, and you may know this, but you may not, after his directorial debut, The Duelists, director Ridley Scott chose his next feature to be science fiction piece due to the success and impact of the original Star Wars film. Ridley's next film was the 1979 feature film Alien.
Yep.
So without Star Wars, Star Trek may have died after 3 seasons.
I'll go.
Alien, which spawned its own franchise, may never have come along.
And I'll go a step further than that. Not as directly, but Blade Runner as well, because it was a sci-fi film, and it had Harrison Ford. I guarantee you, if Star Wars wasn't successful, he probably wouldn't have starred in it if they made it at all.
I was about to say, it may not have existed. He probably wouldn't have starred in it. And I'll even go to this point. Harrison was not by any means one of the top choices to play Han Solo.
Burt
Reynolds, Kurt Russell, Al Pacino, they were all made offers. The doors just happened to open, and that's what launched Harrison Ford's career. So to your point, not only would he not have been a Blade Runner, nobody would have offered him Blade Runner because Star Wars is what launched his career. He would have been known as the
Raiders,
guy with
Raiders. I don't know if he would have got Raiders.
I guarantee he wouldn't have. That was actually offered to Tom Selleck.
Yeah, I remember that.
After he turned it down, Lucas and Spielberg said, well, why not get Harrison Ford? But without Star Wars, Harrison Ford might have been remembered as, you know, that one guy that wore the cowboy hat and American Graffiti, and he kind of had some funny lines driving the car. We might not have known anything else about him.
I think he was in the conversationalist as well.
He was in the conversation, so he had a career that was beginning.
But it wouldn't have been this.
He may have disappeared after the conversation, and he had a small role in Apocalypse Now, which was released after Star Wars, but it was shot before Star Wars.
Right.
It took so long to shoot that film that it released after. But yeah, without Han Solo, he may not have done anything. And Han Solo and Chewbacca were instantly my 2 favorite characters. I loved their dynamics. Yeah. And as a young kid, there was just something about Han Solo. I don't know if I thought in terms of, wow, that's a cool character. He's a cool guy. But there was something about him that I just was like, this guy just seems like he's in control.
Yeah.
He's just doing what he wants. One of my favorite moments was in the original Star Wars where he's chasing those stormtroopers. He's got his blaster, and he's running after them. And they're all running from him. Then he gets to a halt because there's like 18 more stormtroopers. He runs back down there. No, Chewie, go! And he's running back that direction.
Well, you say he seemed like he's always in control. What I always pulled from him was, even when he wasn't in control, he gave in to that. In other words, he did have his moments where I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm just gonna blast my way out.
Yeah, but he's still just in the first Star Wars, whenever they shoot those stormtroopers and that voice comes on, he's like, "Oh, everything's fine, just a slight weapons malfunction. What's your operating?" He just blasts it, boring conversation anyway. So yeah, he would just, I'm gonna make myself in control, even when I'm not. Yeah, was kind of his thing. And then I mean Chewbacca, I just had never seen this tall, hairy beast creature. And I always wondered, and even kind of to this day, Han could speak fluent Wookiee. Nobody else had a clue what this, except 3PO, who spoke millions of languages. Yeah. Chewbacca would just... Han would be like, of course I had oatmeal for breakfast. Yeah. Like, he just could speak with him, and I was enamored by that as well.
Their dynamic's always been one of the best of the movie. Yeah, for sure.
So I say all that to lead up to The Empire Strikes Back, and some things I learned since seeing it as a 4-year-old. The guy that directed The Empire Strikes Back, Irvin Kershner, he met George Lucas because Kershner was a professor in the film school program at USC. Now, he had a decent amount of credits, film and television, to his name, but then here he is inspiring a new generation. I thought that was really cool in and of itself. And then when Lucas offered him, like, you know, he goes back, also speaks to their dynamics and the loyalty and friendship. Lucas like, hey, this is my project that I created. I don't know that I want to direct the second one. So if everybody I could ask, let me get one of my former professors to take the helm. And Kershner originally didn't really want to do it, and he was surprised, and he even asked Lucas, of all the other young hotshot directors, why on earth me? And Lucas's response was, because you know everything a Hollywood director should, but you're not Hollywood. In other words, you're not all caught up in being this young hotshot director, and you're the perfect one that I want to do it. And then a couple other cool things. Kershner, Lucas loved how concerned Kershner was with the character development. And one of the things I love that he said, let me find it here. Kershner said, I was grabbed by the fairy tale which George invented and wanted to be a part of keeping it alive. And then of his cinematic style, Kershner said, I like to fill up the frame with the characters' faces. There's nothing more interesting than the landscape of the human face. And I thought in this film that for its time was reasonably big budget, all these blasts and explosions and space chase scenes, this man still said there's nothing more interesting than the landscape of the human face. I love that.
Well, and I would say this too. I don't know if Lucas knew that before he picked the guy, but let's say he didn't. He might not have been picked because he's like, hey, I mean... You're
focusing on too much of the wrong thing,
but it turned out he was exactly right.
He made the film that much better because he didn't eschew all of the sci-fi stuff, but he said, I'm going to make that work within the framework of what I think is most interesting.
And it turns out he was right, because if you look at all the copycat films that tried to emulate what they were able to emulate, I think that's was their problem. They focused too much on, I've got to make it more special effects. I've got to make the blast bigger than what they've seen before.
Yes, more explosive.
But we didn't care about the characters at all. And it looked like a ripoff of what Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars had already done.
I concur. So he definitely added that layer of humanity to these movies. Talking about the casting a while ago, also I heard a story that the way Mark Hamill found out about the casting of Star Wars, some friend of his that lived in the same building said, hey, I just came from an audition. You need to go check it out. They're casting for several speaking roles for actors around our age. So Mark Hamill went and ended up getting the role of Luke Skywalker. That other guy was not cast, but you may have heard of him, is a guy named Robert Englund that went on to play Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street films. So even though Robert Englund wasn't cast, without him telling Mark Hamill about it, someone else would have probably played Luke Skywalker.
And Mark Hamill would have stayed on 8 is enough, believe it or not.
Yes. And
he was on the pilot, but
was.
because of Star Wars,
so that might have been his only thing. And Mark Hamill's arguably as well known now for doing the voice of the Joker in a lot of the animated stuff. Right. He wouldn't have gotten that opportunity if he wasn't Luke Skywalker.
It's just funny how things lead to another
Everything
thing.
builds, and so now I'll say all that to set up my experience of watching The Empire Strikes Back. But again, I had never been to a movie theater, didn't care about going. We get there, and yes, I'm in kind of a large building, and oh, cool, I didn't know there'd be snacks and popcorn and drink. I don't remember being that interested in all that stuff. Like, I remember seeing it and kind of being like, wow, this all looks cool. But where do we go to see the movie? Mm-hmm. Like, as a 4-year-old, I still was like, no, here's what we came to do. So we go in, and I didn't know the name John Williams. I wasn't a classical movie critic, nor am I still. But I remember, even right now, I remember the moment of that first note, and I just remember being locked in from that moment. Oh, wow. I remember being like, oh, wow. And then the words start scrolling on the screen, and I'm reading it. And you know how a lot of young kids, of what I've seen, the level of focus, like the attention span, is not very strong. They get restless. They get bored. They start squirming. They start asking, are we there yet? And when can we leave? I sat still in that seat and watched and loved every moment of that movie. Like, I did not get bored. When it was over, I didn't want to leave. Mm-hmm. I even remember saying, are they making a third one? Based on how that one ended, Empire Strikes Back ended. My mom, of course, didn't have the answer, but she's like, well, it seems like they might be, because at the end, Luke tells Lando Calrissian, I'll meet you at this rendezvous. Chewie, I'll wait for your signals. I was like, well, when's the new one coming out? Not knowing it was 3 more years, I didn't know the whole filmmaking process. But that's how attentive and locked in I was to that movie. And I just remember being enthralled, really, with everything that was going on. And that big abominable snowman creature, I remember thinking, how's Luke going to get out of this one? That thing could tear him apart.
Well, it's funny you say how attentive you were, because, of course, I'm a few years older than you, so I was a little older.
Yeah.
I think I was like probably 10 or 11 when that movie came out.
Yeah, that's about right.
And it's funny how you say you were so attentive. I remember going to the theater with my dad and my sister, and, of course, me and her were just enthralled by the movie. And we hadn't seen Star Wars.
Oh, that's right. We hadn't even seen it.
It's just I believe I started getting the Empire Strikes Back trading cards, believe it or not. And
I remember some of those.
And we were looking at those, and even my sister was like, I want to look at them. And she looked up, she's like, I want to see this movie now, just based off the cards. Okay. So we went to go see it. My dad took us, and we were enthralled just like you were, like hanging on every word. Yeah. Of course, we knew there was going to be another one, so we were like, I can't wait 2 or 3 years for it to come out. It's got to come out now. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, my dad, on the other hand, who took us to this movie, is sitting there counting his money. So obviously, he didn't have
he could not have cared less about any of the foolishness.
He did kind of perk up when Lando Calrissian came on the screen because he was black. But other than that,
like, oh, who's this guy?
He's like, I got a black person? I'll look at this.
Now this
okay, I kept my money again.
He's not on the screen.
So, totally different experience.
Yeah. There's just so many little things. I remember, and this may not have stood out to you, I don't know, but even as a little kid, do you remember the moment where Lando is escorting them? He says they're going to Chewbacca, Han Solo, and Leia. He says, I just made a deal to keep the Empire out forever. And he opens and Darth Vader stands up.
And he put his hand up.
You can tell about Chewbacca's reaction. And then Han drew his blaster. I remember in that moment, and I guess I might have to go back and watch the original, but I remember thinking, I didn't know if Chewbacca and Han Solo would recognize Darth Vader on sight. I don't think it ever showed them on screen together in the first one. So it's like, I know they know about the Empire, but they had such a strong reaction, immediate blasting on sight. I remember as a young kid going, oh, they know him? Like, that kind of took me a little bit off.
I'm sure, just like we know people that we've never met through media or whatever they had back then. I mean, he was the ruler, so...
True, so I knew they knew him by reputation. Yeah. But on sight, the way they reacted, I remember as a little kid going, oh, I didn't know if they would know him like that.
Well, all I know is Darth Vader was pretty menacing. Even because I was an older kid, but even at like 10, like I said when I saw this movie, when he would, point his finger in the admiral or whatever.
Just start choking people.
I'm like, this guy's kind of, I don't know if I want to be in the same room.
What? Yeah, the knowing what he could do, but I also remember, to that point, part of me was still like, I think Chewbacca could take him. Not thinking about the lightsaber and the Force, just looking at him, I still was sort of like, I don't know, man. If Chewbacca just gets it, like if he just really gets at him, not knowing that he couldn't have gotten close enough.
I never thought that, because when I saw him just point his finger and people start choking.
True.
And it was so funny because when the next admiral or whatever took charge, you could tell he didn't want it. You could tell he didn't want no part of that.
You're in control. Oh, thanks. That's the worst promotion you can do.
Hey, thanks, my lord.
Yeah. Let me even address you properly here.
Thanks, my lord, but you can tell I really don't want to do this.
No, heck no. And then another character that I thought was really cool, and over time I've realized I certainly wasn't in a minority, was Boba Fett. Yeah. Think about this. He only speaks 4 times in that movie. They never address him by name until Return of the Jedi.
Right.
Vader just says bounty hunter.
Yeah.
He calls him bounty hunter. We know hardly anything about his backstory. He just was so cool. I don't know, just the way he carried himself. And then in the Return of the Jedi, he flew with his little jetpack thing.
Because he didn't say anything.
Because there's just this
if they would have given him more dialogue, you probably wouldn't have had that same reaction.
You're probably right. And I remember my mom as a kid being like, because I wanted to buy the Boba Fett action figure, and I was excited, and she was like, Jared, you like him? He wanted to kill Han Solo. I thought Han Solo was your favorite. Well, he is, but you still want this kid? Yes. Hey. I was kind of like, what don't you understand? He's cool, too.
It's all part of the theater.
Yeah. I was like, yes, I still like Boba Fett. And she was just like, okay. It just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then I was also introduced to one of my all-time favorite movie characters to this day, and he is on my shirt, Yoda. I remember as a child thinking he was just so funny. When they first encountered him, he's just this green little elfish prankster.
And you have no idea
toying with him.
Who he is.
You have no idea. And then when he starts talking to Obi-Wan, I kind of reacted like Luke is like, Yoda?
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, like this. And then, man, when Yoda raised the X-Wing out of the swamp, I remember thinking, he's that funny and he's powerful like this. Like I was stunned as a child.
He's basically like, okay, I'm getting tired. Let me just show you real quick.
Well, and we've talked in other episodes about just having confidence and believing in ourselves and motivating people. Man, Luke was like, I can't do this. It's too big. And Yoda told him, that is why you fail. Oh, I'll try. No. Try not. Do or do not. And then Yoda, with seemingly no effort, just raises it. And he's like, I can't believe you did that. That's why you fail. Just all these little lessons. And what's funny, too, and I've thought about this next part as I've gotten older. I was immediately drawn to Yoda. He was one of my favorites in all of the Star Wars films. A few years later, when I saw a movie entitled The Karate Kid, I met another one of my all-time favorite movie characters, Mr. Miyagi. And as a young child, you might have thought I would have been more drawn to the young hero, Luke Skywalker, Daniel LaRusso. And while I liked those guys, I was substantially more drawn to and more interested in Yoda and Miyagi. And as a young kid, I didn't give it any thought. I just was like, well, of course I like those guys better. They were both funny. They were both powerful. They were both wise. And I just thought they were amazing characters. As I've gotten older, I did kind of ask myself, at that age, why did I like those two characters so much more than the ones that were at least seemingly should have been more relatable to me at that age? And so I don't know. I'm speculating what I'm about to say. But you know me well enough, and we work together, and you've heard me talk about some of the jobs I've had since then. One thing I love to do is invest in people. Like, I love just trying, if I can somehow, trying to inspire someone and trying to help someone to be the best they can be. So I look back and I'm thinking, were Yoda and Miyagi my first two influences as far as being that type of person? Or was that already in me and they kind of helped unlock it? Because I saw that demonstrated, and I don't know.
I think you connected with them because it was already in you, and you saw that. And when you see somebody exhibiting what you feel, think, and you don't even know you feel or think it, then sometimes you think it's them who motivated you, but it was already there. You just identified with it.
That very well
That's
may
what
be
draws
the
you
case.
to them, because you're like, I see myself in that.
Yeah.
And so I that's what I think.
And you very well may be right. As a young child, I did not make that connection. I just knew there was something about those two characters that I was just really drawn to, and I couldn't even quite explain what it was. But as I grew up, I've always loved helping people and just going out of my way to help people. And I'm like, did they put me on that path? Or like you said, that's who I already was. And then when I saw that in those two characters, it gave me reason to go, oh.
Yeah, and sometimes you need confidence in seeing somebody do it. Like, you might feel a certain way or think a certain way or have a certain understanding of something, but then you see it on canvas or you see it on screen and you're like, that's what I've been trying to express. That's what I've got in here, but now that I see somebody can actually do it, now I can do it too. So I think it's a combination of both. They probably drew it out of you, but it has to be there. It has to be there.
That makes sense.
Let me ask you this though, because I said mine was 70s, early 70s, I'm sure, and probably a drive-in. Have you ever been to a drive-in?
I have, but not until I was quite a bit older.
Okay.
There was a drive-in, and I don't know if it's even still active, but it was in Indiana, probably 45 minutes or so from where I grew up. As a teenager, my friends and I would go there sometimes. So, like, after I was driving, sometimes my friends and I would go to the drive-in. But no, as a young kid, there wasn't really one real close. So I went to indoor theaters all the time until I was old enough to drive.
Like many things in life, I hate it for kids or even people that didn't get a chance to experience certain things because the world's changed so much. And I hate to sound old, but it has. Like, it's always going to be the case. But when you're on the earth long enough, obviously you see it. And there's so many simple things that we did as children that these guys won't even experience. You know,
lunchboxes, drive-in movies.
Like we talked about, Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, Saturday morning WWF wrestling.
I mean, it's totally different. Even riding bikes. There's kids, believe it or not, that are teenagers and they don't know how to ride a bike. And I'm like, that would be so foreign to me growing up in the 70s, because that was like a rite of passage.
You would spend hours a day with your friends.
It's just, that's why I ask, because I talk about a drive-through and people have this blank look on their face, or drive-in, I'm sorry, and they have this blank look on their face, and I'm like, yeah, you just didn't get to experience this.
I don't know what the first movie I saw at the drive-in was, but I remember going multiple times after I got older. One that I saw at the drive-in was Twister, which was in 1994. But that wasn't the first one, but I do remember seeing that one at the drive-in. And we would usually go and watch back-to-back movies.
Gotcha.
Because they would show 2 in a row. So if we were going on a weekend, we would just allot enough time.
Which they don't even do anymore. You know, theaters used to do a double feature.
Yeah,
You could go see 2, but now, I mean, unless you're cheating, I mean, I'll buy a ticket and don't go back to the counter and slide into another one. But I'll make my own double feature, but they don't have double features anymore.
That's true. Yeah. Just all the ways that this world changes around us over time is, I mean, you live long enough, you see tons of changes. And I often look at someone like Clint Eastwood, who's about to be 95 years old, and I think, man, what is that like for him to look back at his life and all the things that change? Because if we're doing it at our age, imagine someone that's 95 and all the things that he sees now that he never thought was possible. I mean, the way the internet works now, when we were growing up, sounded like a pitch for a new Star Trek movie or a new Star Wars movie.
I remember first hearing about the internet in the mid-'80s, like 84, 85.
Oh, that was way before I knew
And, well, I didn't know it was going to be called internet, but they were talking about there's going to be a day, you know, where you can shop at home, from home, on your computer, and the technology's already there. And I'm just like, yeah, right. No one's never going to not go. You're always going to want to go into the store, and now.
Yeah, who would do that?
Mean, and it seems so foreign, but now that's how we do it. Yeah.
There's so much online shopping, work from home jobs, streaming movies, YouTube, having a YouTube channel, all these things.
Or even Blockbuster being gone. Who would have thought?
I would never thought I'd see that.
And basically in a
2-year
period too. It didn't take long for that.
Redbox and Netflix came along,
and by the way, the folks that had that technology went to Blockbuster and said, "Do you want to buy us out?" And Blockbuster was like, "No, no one's ever going to do that." A year later, they're coming back to them, going, "We want to buy you out."
Yes.
They're like, "No, we don't." Netflix. Yeah. If it was Netflix, they're like, "We don't need you," because they were Blockbuster actually told Netflix when Netflix pitched them to buy it. Blockbuster told them, "What do we need you for?" A year later, maybe 2 years, but I believe it was a year later.
Maybe 2, but yeah.
Blockbuster came back to Netflix and they called the meeting and said, "Hey, remember that meeting we had? We're actually interested in doing that now." And Netflix told them, "But what do we need you for?"
I was about to say, I guarantee they turned that statement around on. Wow.
Things change. But anyway.
Didn't know we were getting topic within a topic. Didn't know we were going to be talking about Blockbuster today. But we are talking about movies, so why not?
Yeah.
All right. Well, there are our movies that we first saw in theaters. Hope y'all enjoyed this as much as we did. Talmadge, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, except that Empire Strikes Back was one of my favorites as well. So I had no idea that was your first movie. But
I had to really go back and look. I knew it was one of my first.
But yeah, that's one of my favorites of all time. So that had to be a great experience, not only to go to the movies for the first time, but actually it being a great movie on top of that. And I'm sure that kind of fed what you want to do now. That's part of it. I
didn't know it at the time, but honestly, I can look back and say that's when I first became really enamored with storytelling.
Yeah.
Like I was excited to tell everybody about this movie that I'm sure I drove everybody that knew me to the point of not wanting to be around me. Because I wouldn't stop talking about it.
But that still happens now.
I was going to say, and that for other reasons, that still happens.
You're right. That doesn't
But
change.
I remember just wanting to tell everybody about Yoda and Chewbacca and all these things I saw in this movie. So, to your point, I think that was when I first became interested in the art of storytelling without knowing that that's what I was interested in. Yeah. So, all right, there are our choices. If you like the episode, please show that by clicking the like button. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to the channel. It will help enable me to continue to bring you more of this type of content, as well as many other kinds. And tell us in the comments, what's the first movie you remember seeing in the theaters as a kid, and what memories do you have of it now? And maybe tell us what year it was and how old you are. So if you don't mind saying, give us some context of how old you might have been when you saw this or whatever. Anyway, for Talmadge... Excuse me. For the Talmadge Rodger Varnado,
That's all I needed.
The third, I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J. Thanks for stopping by. Hope y'all have a great week, and hope I see you again real soon. One of the best...